I'm going to start the recording and then I'm going to share my beautiful screen. One moment, please. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Move the Needle, Tools for White Women, Femmes, and Thems, Voting Blue in Red Communities.
If you are not sure if you are in the right place, you are. We have explicitly designed our content for white women, non-binary folks, and female acculturated folks. If this isn't you, but you'd like to learn more, or you'd like to bring your learning back to friends and family, you are welcome.
We meet every Sunday evening, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time on Zoom and Instagram Live, because we're kind of living in the future, until the Sunday after the election, because we're going to need a debrief after the election, I believe.
Debrief, co-celebration, it's going to be amazing.
So let's talk a little bit about our working agreements as we have these conversations. And these are working agreements that Jess and I have with each other.
We talked more about the concept of working agreements last week, including why and how to develop them, and walked us through a semi-real example with me and my mother, who is unfortunately not here to participate in them. So it was me imagining the conversation. And we will recap that in a little bit more in a few minutes. The first one is no right to comfort. Patricia and I invite each other and everyone joining us into loving accountability. We have known Patricia and I and loved each other for a long time. And so we work hard to love each other enough to tell the truth and to hold up mirrors that need holding up. We know that kindness and honesty are not mutually exclusive, and that we don't have the right to comfort in this learning as white women, because this is not a safe space, because the world that we're trying to address is not a safe space. It's a brave space, and we approach our learning accordingly.
We also agree to resist binary thinking in these conversations. There's no right or wrong. There is just different contexts, different things to learn. And it's always within the context of the people that we're having conversations with. So resisting binary thinking is a pretty important concept, I believe, for us.
As is welcoming generative conflict. In dominant American culture, dominant Western culture, in the Midwest, as women, for myself as a native Southerner, we are often rewarded for being nice instead of being real, and for being conciliatory instead of leaning into necessary conflict. So Patricia and I invite each other and everyone in our communities to allow a lot of emotional space to be in conflict with each other, with the ideas being presented, and even with ourselves as needed.
And finally, to ask for the speed we need. Pausing, thinking, reflecting is not necessarily about comfort, but certainly open to interrogation of comfort. But asking for the speed that we need allows us to be learners in this space. And it allows us to be thinkers and to be thoughtful, and absorb and recognize when we're being triggered by something that is deeply embedded and not helpful inside of us. So asking for the speed we need is another important concept that we share as we work on these working agreements together.
Yeah.
And so who are we?
Why are we talking to anyone in the first place?
I am Patricia Berry. I am a white, cis, hetero woman. I am a salty Buddhist. I am in a relationship with a white, cis, hetero male. And I think that is important to a lot of the things that we bring into these conversations is some of the conversations that I have in that relationship.
I am Jessica Letaw. My last name rhymes with seesaw. Most people call me Jess. I am a white, cis, queer woman living in the Midwestern United States, originally from the South. I think a lot about the responsibility of being in the world in a body like mine. And that is a big part of why I do the work that I do in and around race and specifically learning circles with and for white women. That's a big part of why we're here tonight. I am really interested in what it means to be a white woman who participates in the radical imagining of a world of collective care, more welcoming, more belonging. And a lot of the work that I do is geared towards that. A lot of the work that I do is also in politics. And let me tell you, the great looks that I get when I talk about radical imagination and policy in the same breath, but I think more of us should do it, quite frankly. So in this context, I am thinking pretty much every minute of every day about what the next few months are going to look like in terms of the presidential election. And when Kamala declared her bid to seek the nomination, the presidential nomination from the Democrat Party, within 5 minutes, I had texted Patricia and I said, please, can we do something around this? And that is because white women operate at this interesting intersection of oppression in terms of the patriarchy and privilege in terms of a racist culture. And moving through that is a nuanced experience, and understanding it should be a nuanced experience as well. So in terms of why we're here in general, I have the aspiration that Patricia and I and the folks coming along with us are going to change white women's voting behavior in swing and battleground communities.
And being a white person who was raised in Boise, Idaho, at a time where I was pretty much surrounded by other white people, learning to have brave conversations with people that I love about race and power and gender dynamics is really another reason I want to exercise this muscle. I want to be able to talk about politics without it devolving into an ultimatum. And we'll talk a little bit about ultimatums, but I just want to have loving conversations about things that we care about without feeling like we're taking it personally.
Where are we? First of all, should have put this at the top, 72 days left until the election. Not that anyone or everyone is counting, 72 days left until the election. So every week we're going to talk a little bit about this political moment, what's happening, what's been happening, and how we can participate in that. Most recently this week, of course, was the Democratic National Convention and Vice President Harris's historic nomination acceptance. There was also some poetry, some great music. Lil Jon from Georgia showed up to nominate VP Harris, which was a beautiful moment, a wonderful hometown moment for me, especially as an exennial. Having him show up was like, oh my God, I'm 20 again.
What did you call yourself? Can I back up to that? I've never heard that term. Is that a mashup of?
I'm a generation exennial.
Sorry, please continue.
It's all good. Every day changes depending on what generation I claim. Today it's exennial.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And in terms of individuals, it's helpful and important to know that across the United States, there has been massive voter unenrollment, and especially Republican-led states. There have been big pushes to purge the rolls, ostensibly of non-active voters, but often what this does is punish elderly folks, people of color, people who vote less frequently. And a lot of times there's mistakes with it. The way that voter rolls are managed are not quite as straightforward as one might think or hope. So what I'll say now and say it again at the end of the conversation is please make sure you are registered to vote by going to vote.gov and checking to make sure you are registered in your state.
Thank you. That is really important. I would hate to get to the polls and realize I could not vote. So one of the ways that Jess and I have conceptualized these conversations is building blocks for how to have conversations with people we love about this political moment, about race, about gender, about inequality, about what's happening in the world, particularly when our family members and people that we love may have a totally different way of thinking about things than we do. So one of the things that we talked about last week, so just reviewing our tools that we're going to build on, the topic last week was creating loving boundaries. And one of the things that we did was break down, how do you ask for boundaries, right? So there's requests, which are, could you please not yell in this conversation? But that's a request. I didn't give anybody an ultimatum or an alternative of what's going to happen if you don't follow that. And that's usually when you're in very loving, trusting relationships, you can make those sort of requests and feel confident that they will be carried out without having to give an if-then statement. I'm sorry, I'm an old developer, so I'm like thinking about them as if-then statements. And then you get on to boundaries, right? So boundaries are, if you're yelling during this conversation, I am going to leave the table and I'll revisit this conversation when you're not as activated. And this is just an example. You can have all sorts of boundaries in conversation about, you know, things that you feel comfortable talking about, things that you don't feel comfortable talking about. And you should be extending these boundaries, obviously, to the people that you're having the conversation with. Then you come to ultimatums, right? So that's, you know, much clearer about if you're yelling or if you're doing this thing that I am finding uncomfortable, I cannot be around you at all while you're behaving like this. So it's a stronger version of boundaries. You're giving somebody a really hard line about do this or else I'm totally removing myself from the situation, or some other ultimatum that you have in there. And then the other thing that we talked about was grief, you know, and I think that was so important that Jess brought that up, that, you know, sometimes when we are having these boundaried conversations, we do get into ultimatum mode with people, and we have to make choices. Can I be around this person anymore? People may make that choice about me. I cannot be around me anymore. And we have to deal with the grief of how our relationships are changing and how we're keeping them open or not. Loving agreements are things that we, like what we used at the beginning of this conversation, which was, what are our agreements before we're going to go into a difficult conversation? And one of the examples that Jess used last time was asking permission. Mom, I'd like to talk to you about a difficult subject. Is that okay with you? And if she says yes, then get into, can we have some agreements about how we're going to engage with each other? You know, can we agree to be curious instead of critical? Can we talk about personal feelings instead of generalizations? Can we assume the other person has good intentions and is doing their best? Those were just draft agreements that Jess and I brought up in our last conversation that you could start with if you were getting ready to have a really difficult conversation with somebody you loved. You know, putting those agreements in place. You know, Jess and I have been friends for a long time, and we certainly have Midwest disagreements, which are just very...
Sounds a lot like this. Patricia, I think blue is green.
And I'll be like, okay. That's a Midwest disagreement.
Right.
But even with this loving relationship that Jess and I have, with this friendship that we have, one of the reasons I think that it maintains so much integrity as the years have progressed in some pretty difficult times, that we create loving agreements about how we can talk. We make loving requests. So, you know, this is a life skill that I use in my fundraising practice, both me raising money or teaching people how to raise money. Obviously, I don't necessarily use the word loving, but can we have some agreements? Can we ask some permission? So that's just reviewing what we were talking about last week. But now we're going to move on to building blocks of that. And that is...
deep listening. Deep listening. This was a really natural next step from, once we've created the conversation, what do we do next? And I think a lot of people would jump to, let me share this fire hose of information. I can't wait to share with you about my favorite candidate, my favorite issue, my favorite soapbox, my favorite pet peeve. And that is actually not how change gets made in the world. It's deep listening.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that's very dear to my heart, particularly as I work on the relationship with my beloved. You know, as a cis white male enculturated for 58 years in this culture, listening is a tough one for him. And he's very open to the conversation, but it's going to be a journey to bring him along, as it has been for me. So I thought a lot about this conversation and this wonderful quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. Deep listening helps us to recognize the existence of wrong perceptions in the other person and wrong perceptions in us. The other person has wrong perceptions about him or herself and about us. And we have wrong perceptions about ourselves and the other person. And that is the foundation for violence and conflict and war, is our wrong perceptions about each other. So that's what we're up to with deep listening. It's not that we're going to turn somebody to vote differently necessarily. We're opening the conversation and we're willing to be changed by it. So one of the things that we're thinking about as we enter into this conversation is, how does deep listening disrupt white culture? And first and foremost, it's the power imbalance. We are enculturated, particularly as white people and white women who have towed the line for white male-dominated culture. We are listening in a way to get ready to prove our credibility and authority, rather than actually listening to the person. So if we're practicing deep listening, that's disrupting how we have been trained in white culture, particularly, like I said, as women who have been engaged in this conversation that was created by white male culture.
The last piece of information in this one, go back to Patricia's and my whys. We want to build our muscle for difficult and conflictual conversation as white women, and we want to be able to change voting behavior. So when I was thinking about why deep listening is a learning space for Democrats, y'all, we can be jerks. Just straight up. We are so sure we're right. We talk down to people who disagree with us. We are infamously unable
We
to
are
take
in
on
Ann Arbor,
information.
Michigan, and I'm just going to say that takes on a level of jerkness that is like, it's the leaders and the best at the University of Michigan love a good soliloquy.
Let's own it, Ann Arbor, and let's own it, white women and Democrats. We are just often so unable to take on information that disagrees with a cherished belief, a cherished candidate, a cherished issue, and that causes real problems, because if we signal to the people we're talking to that we are absolutely unwilling to listen, they have no reason to engage in a meaningful conversation or to participate in any kind of thought around change. We're going to get into the mechanics of deep listening in a moment, but I just want to remind ourselves and each other that it is important to come into a difficult conversation, or a conversation that you may be unused to having with the other person or people. It's important to come into those in a centered way. If you just had a car accident an hour ago, if you are dealing with some real resentment with the person that you're talking to, you are not going to be able to listen in a deep, authentic, connected way until you're able to shake off that energy, until you're able to recover the way that you need to. So just be mindful that starting a challenging conversation or working to do some radical listening isn't just a matter of sitting down and putting your elbows on the table. It genuinely requires physical presence.
And breathing. Recognize
Ooh,
where you're
breathe.
taking it in your body.
Right.
Like I'll try to sit up more when I am in a deep listening space, and I'll try to breathe and really become fully present. So some aspects of deep listening. First of all, in a conversation, and I do this in any conversation, limit your distractions. If you're able, and I know not everybody is able to do this, turn off, turn down your cell phone. Stop chasing squirrels, stop interrupting, like just be present in the conversation.
I'm breathing because I have a very recent example of doing this next one badly. Number two is listen to reflect, not to respond. An example of this is what I'm hearing you say is. Patricia and I get ready for these conversations every week. We sit down, we talk about what would be fruitful, building on the tool of last week, what's going to be something meaningful in making election related change. And when Patricia brought up listening, she had some really good ideas about why to include it and what to include. And I immediately jumped to what I thought about her idea. And then I thought, you know what? Let me practice what we're doing. So I worked very hard to reflect back to her what I was hearing her say about listening, and missed the mark twice, even though I thought that I had really nailed it. And it's not about repeating it back verbatim,
No.
it's about making sure that you have accurately received what has been communicated. And by like, I knew you wanted to talk about listening. I didn't, misconceive that you wanted to talk about butterflies. But in terms of what you were trying to get at, that took me, I think, 3 tries of repeating it back to you before I genuinely got the concept. So it's hard, y'all.
And this is, I'm going to be really honest, this is one of the tools that I learned in couples therapy. My beloved and I started couples therapy really early because I love a good interruption. Oh my gosh, I can interrupt you because I know exactly what you're going to say. I got some ideas. I'm going to tell you how to do it. It's all going to be good. So working on this muscle has actually been revolutionary in my work, in my relationship, and in my difficult conversations, because we are certainly entering a phase of extra difficult conversations. And the gift that you give people by repeating to them what they just said to you is amazing. I have had some amazing coaches that have done this to me, and I mean, almost brought me to tears. Like that emotional moment about I was really heard. Somebody took that moment to really hear what I was saying, even if they don't agree with me. It does not matter whether you agree with the thing the person is saying. Do you understand what they are saying? It is a gift that will deepen all of your relationships, and strangers on the street, truthfully. Um,
The next one I really love, and canny listeners will have heard this show up in my imagined conversation with my mom. Number 3 is be curious rather than critical. An example of that is, could you help me understand more about? Receiving an idea that's contradictory to what you expect or believe often lands on the body real hard and immediately causes a nuh-uh response physically, emotionally, and intellectually. Pausing that, not saying don't feel the feeling, but pause before you respond. And instead of jumping to why they're wrong, ask how they got there. Patricia, in our conversation last week, talked about assuming good intent. Assume the other person is doing the best that they can. An aspect of that that I bring to a lot of my political conversations is assume the other person has a really good reason to do what they do and believe what they believe. So if there's something showing up in the conversation that's counter to how you have seen things for a while, asking questions. How did you come to believe this? What's the first time that you remember thinking this? What has shown up in the world, in issues and candidates, that's demonstrated that this belief is correct? Asking those open-ended questions helps connect you to the person that you're talking with far more than to the idea, hooking directly onto the idea. And that, again, is that goal behind deep listening.
the psychology of this too always blows my mind. Like, at least for me, if somebody gets me talking on the thing, a lot of times I will realize my unexamined opinions because I've said them myself rather than been told by the other person what's wrong with me or what's wrong with my thinking. Because a lot of times the reason that I feel the way that I feel is because I haven't examined it. I haven't said it out loud. It's just something that I've been carrying around with for, however long. So this is a tremendous anti-rhetoric kind of turn of how to really get people start thinking about what they believe and actually why. It's a tremendous tool.
I'll say something too about this one. Folks that are new to racial justice work, and let me rephrase that, white folks that are new to racial justice work, a lot of times their first question is, how do I solve racism? We said at the very top of this conversation that one of the ways to subvert white dominated, white privileging culture is authentic connection. White culture functions to disconnect. White privileging and white centering culture functions to assign a hierarchy and a value to the people that are speaking, meaning that one person is supposed to be more informed, one less informed. One's a good guy, one's a bad guy. Someone is holding those roles. Can you fix every corner of racism by showing up, to the office tomorrow? No. Can you subvert it in your intimate everyday relationships? 100%. Yes, you can.
And silence. It's the generosity of time. I will even sometimes, because humans are so uncomfortable with silence, when I am using it as a tool, I do say something. I will say, I want to just take a minute and think about that. And then I sit with it for a second. Some of the most dynamic social justice people I have worked with, when I first started working with them, I just wanted to choke them out. They were quiet all the time. And I'm an outer process. I was just like, come on, let's go. And then I began to realize what they were doing. They were using that silence and that time to absorb, compute a little bit, process, and then have a thoughtful response that usually had some sort of curiosity associated with it. So silence is really about being generous in a conversation, and I just can't overstate its importance.
I will refer to this a little bit more, a little bit later in this conversation, but Marshall Rosenberg, in his book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life, talks about receiving empathetically, which is what Patricia and I are calling deep listening. And the very first part of the chapter is, don't just do something, sit there, which I think is a wonderful way to describe silence.
It's interesting when I recognized that what I was doing was overcoming these feelings of inadequacy and being stupid that were kind of lifelong when I was a child. Once I recognized that my talking and proving myself was an aspect of making me feel better and it was disconnecting me from the conversation, I got quieter. I quit saying things. I wasn't any smarter, but people thought I was smarter because I wasn't talking so much. So silence it does a lot of things, but it has really become kind of a power tool for me in a lot of ways. Be willing to be changed. If you're really listening, if you're really, really listening, you're going to be changed. And does that mean that you're suddenly going to, switch your side of the aisle and not vote the way that you were planning on voting anyway? No. But you maybe will stop belittling people who are at a different phase of their journey, their learning journey, or belittling people that think differently than you do, and that you've ascribed that thought process to an intellectual deficit. Like, there's real reasons, that people make the choices that they make, and they come from their current circumstance. And learning that you can be changed and you can think differently makes it possible to have these conversations.
One example that's showing up in political conversations a lot, at least in the social media bubbles that I'm in, is what it means to enthusiastically embrace Vice President Harris's historic nomination, her incredibly short run to the presidency, on November 5th, 72 days away from right now, if you're watching on Sunday, less than that, if you are joining us a day later, while also acknowledging that she is human. And I'm not going to say an imperfect candidate. I don't think perfection is a concept that relates to humans, but that has probably, with her lengthy record of public service, done things that you don't agree with, that I don't agree with. And there are criticisms that are absolutely valid to be lodged about that public service record, about work relationships, about what she is planning to do once in the White House. Those criticisms are important to look in the eye. I've said this before in these conversations. My very good friend and colleague Molly Kleinman often says that voting is not like getting married. It's like catching a bus. You are not choosing your one and only forever. You are taking the path that's going to get closest to your destination. I've said before, I will say many more times, I want to fight with a Harris-Walz administration about the things that I care about more than a Trump-Vance administration.
Mm-hmm.
Being willing to acknowledge my candidate's parts of her record that trouble me is a part of productively engaging that conflict, because I'm not meeting her where I think she should be, where I'm imagining that she is. I'm meeting her where she's at and asking her to go further.
And I think that that is, some of my hardest disagreements that I've been having over the last couple of months have been me, a Democrat, criticizing a Democratic candidate that has somehow gained cult status, and being a salty Buddhist who probably questions everything, including religion and including anybody who's been canonized as, the next coming of politics. I'm allowed to do that, and there's really good reasons for doing that. We're engaging in a conversation that hopes all of us will be changed and all of us will be partners in creating a more equitable outcome. So.
Number 6, validate. An example of this is, I understand why you believe this. I'm going to be so honest, you guys, even when I'm doing a great job of listening, this one physically hurts me the most. It is humbling when I have to acknowledge that despite everything that I've just said about believing that the person on the other side of the table from me has good intentions and has great information, it's still humbling to realize that they're doing a great job with what they've got. And saying, I understand why you believe this, a lot of times at first pass feels like a betrayal of what I believe. If it's something that's different, it's not that. It's not me saying I have necessarily changed my mind. Perhaps that's what you're saying, but that's not what the validation is. The validation is saying, I see where you as a human have arrived at your thoughts and beliefs. I get it. Again, referring to Marshall Rosenberg, he says, listen not just to the text of what a person says, but what they need. They may be articulating in their policy positions a fear. They may be articulating in their policy positions a longing for a family that they have, that they had and no longer have, or that they have always longed for. There is always a need, whether articulated more often not, that is behind these deeply dense and wonky conversations. Listening for that need, and not just for what candidate X has said, what was on Y ballot in the election. Listening for that is much more authentically going to connect you who you're listening to and allow you to much more authentically validate. If you cannot validate the other person comfortably or authentically, you have not asked enough questions. Time to go back to number 2. I don't remember. Time to go back and ask some more questions.
Be curious.
If you can't validate, be curious. Shorten the gap between what you understand and what you don't, and just keep asking those questions.
And the way that I'll say about validating is, I understand why you believe this is a complete sentence. The minute you add but, you've ruined everything.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. Please don't ever put but at the end of a validation.
Yeah, I understand why you believe this, but you're wrong. You don't. If you say, but you do not understand why they believe this. And it, if you can't even validate, the other thing that you can do is appreciate. And that's kind of like my cheat sheet if I'm really having a tough time validating. I can say, I appreciate the passion you're bringing to this conversation. It looks, it seems like this is very important to you. So I can see them, even if I can't validate. But again, I'll go back to Jess's point. If I can't validate, I haven't asked enough questions. I haven't sat with them for long enough.
The last tool for the sake of this conversation is to ask permission before responding. So we have gone through this rather exhaustive listening process. And by the way, you can bring note cards to a conversation if you want to. Over time, deep listening, kind of this radical listening process, becomes more embedded in how you do things. So when Patricia and I were getting ready for this conversation, for example, we just kind of have to excavate either what we do or what we try to do in our most challenging conversations. This wasn't about coming up with things from scratch. But a part of that is making sure that the listening has traveled its whole journey. Great ways to punctuate before you jump into a response. Just make sure that it's time to turn those tables. Is there anything else that you want to say about this? What else do you want me to know about this? Those can be really powerful questions. One that I don't think is necessarily 100% related to this conversation, but that I have used when learning more, especially about more technical issues. Typically, the very last question that I'll ask is, who else should I be talking to? And that lets folks know I'm still listening, I'm still learning, I haven't entirely made up my mind about this. And actually, I think that question does pertain. Like, is there anybody else they should be talking to about this? Guarantee they are going to have somebody that you should be listening to or reading or talking to. So there's that. But before jumping into that response, make sure that there has been all the space that's needed for the other person to communicate their information and, again, the subtext of their needs.
And it's fascinating if you practice this. It certainly takes time. And that's the gift, right, of having these conversations, of really meeting people exactly where they're at and saying, is your statement complete before I begin my statement or my conversation or aspect of the relationship? It's just fascinating to me how generous this feels to me, that it's a gift that I give to my fellow human. And when people give me this gift, how grateful I am for it. It changes my feelings about the subject, even if I haven't changed my mind, because I have met the person and they have heard me rather than judged me. An important part, I think, of us coming together in some sort of cohesive whole.
I really love that. And it's important to, we've talked about the importance of authenticity and real connection this entire time. This one, maybe most of all, because if you are asking this question in an ungenerous way, it comes across as, and I kid you not, are you done yet?
Are you finished?
I have things that, are you done yet? So make sure.
Because now I'm buckling up, I'm going to change your mind.
Right. Buckle up, Buttercup. I got things to say. So to avoid that feeling, make sure that even into this very last step, asking permission before responding, what else do you want me to know? What else is there to say on this topic? Make sure that that is a genuine invitation.
Conversation that is generous and compassionate by its very existence softens the edge of rhetoric and paves the way for change. When we silence, we create tyrannies. When we battle, we create enemies. When we listen, we create communities. Those communities might not agree, but they are a community.
We've been saying all along, that our republic is our relationships. Deep listening, radical listening continues to knit those relationships and our republic closer together.
When we say kitchen table politics, we actually mean kitchen table politics.
Literally. Yep.
So we have some calls to action we wanted to leave you with. So this week, if you can, try some deep listening with somebody with whom you have good boundaries. Don't start with the, guy across the street who you don't really talk to that much. Like, go to a safe space, tell them what you're doing, reiterate your boundaries, and try some deep listening just to get the muscle going.
Patricia, I see my connection is a little bit unstable, so please let me know if you can hear me.
I can.
Okay, on the political side, make sure you're registered to vote. www.vote.gov. Just make sure that you're enrolled. If you voted in a primary this summer or early fall, you're probably fine, but there's nothing wrong with double checking because, as Patricia said earlier, the last thing that you want to do is roll up to the ballot box and find out that you can't vote, especially if you're in a state, which many of them are, that doesn't have same day registration. Thanks, AG Nessel, for making sure that we can do that here in Michigan.
And in a minute, I'm going to stop the screen share and I'm going to check. I can't do them both at once because apparently I'm living in the future, but not all the way in the future. So if you're thinking about a question now, we will pause towards the end. We just have a couple more slides, but go ahead and put them in the question or the chat, and I will stop the screen share in a minute and we'll check them.
And for folks that are joining us on Instagram, no, you're not missing anything. You can't see the slides. I can't either, actually. You can see them on YouTube. If you go to Patricia Berry's channel, it takes a little bit for us to upload them, so it won't be today and it probably won't be tomorrow, but we will have all of the content on there. So again, go to Patricia Berry, Berry's channel. Patricia, if they search Salty Fundraiser on YouTube, will they find you, or is it, or do you have your total grown-up name there?
That's a great question. And I would say if you have that question, email me at patricia@patricia-berry.com. I'll make sure you get sorted out. And I'm going to be really honest, I haven't uploaded any of the videos yet.
We'll get there.
We're building this plane as we fly.
That is 100% real. And remember, I said at the top of the hour, you are an amazing flight attendant. I meant it. So thanks for not letting us fall out of the air yet. Yeah. Appreciate that. And we can also send out a follow-up email to attendees. Thank you again, by the way, to everyone that's joined us. And we can include the link to Patricia's YouTube and the videos when we go up there. We'll all be up there with all of the slides.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to share is I had a really, you guys, I don't even want to tell you how tall my book stack was for this conversation. There was a lot that deep listening made me think of. You let me know correctly that not everyone wants to leave a 1 hour Zoom and go do 7 hours of homework. And so I had to trim my reading list from 8 books back to 2. So everyone is welcome. But I think that these 2 are really, really powerful and juicy ones based on what we talked about today. The first one is Me and White Supremacy by Layla Epsad. This book was the basis of one of the first learning circles for white women that I convened almost a decade ago now. It couldn't be quite a decade because she published the book about 6 years ago. But there is so much in this book about placing ourselves as individuals within racist structures and understanding how our individual relationships and actions and choices roll up to build these really harmful systems and institutions that we participate in that function as disproportionate oppressors to our friends and neighbors around us, holding marginalized identities. Me and White Supremacy makes this work very intimate. And the first time that I went through it, I think, was a major unbuilding of myself and my self-identity as an adult. I'm specifically going to point folks to day 5, which is called You and White Superiority. I think the title speaks for itself, and it also goes to what we were talking about at the top of the hour about how deep listening subverts white and white privilege and culture. The other one that I want to recommend strongly, that I've referenced multiple times in this conversation, is Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. This one didn't unbuild me quite as much as Me and White Supremacy, but this one, I think, let me see if I can get to the language on this, introduced me to how gentle radical action and radical change could be. Not easy, but gentle. And folding nonviolent in communication into especially the conflictual political work that I do has been a radical act for me and continues to be. And I will say this one probably humbles me more regularly than anything else. And it's one of the ones that I aspire to. So Me and White Supremacy by Layla Epsad and Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, both really, and specifically the chapter on Receiving Empathetically, chapter number 7. Again, one of the very first things in the chapter, don't just do something, sit there. So, it's not exactly tongue in cheek, but it is a very human approach to how to make big change in the world through your relationships and through your conversations.
And I'll say Me and White Supremacy, when my beloved and I went into couples therapy, which I did right away for many reasons, one of the things that we also brought to our relationship was once a week reading a chapter. And it's been 2 or 3 times that I've read the book, and 2 or 3 times I've had different people in the conversation. I learned something new about them, myself, every time I read it.
Patricia, you don't have to get out of your screen to go into the Q&A. I've got it pulled up. Jennifer Russell is participating with us. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us. As a Spartan, I agree that Ann Arbor people can be difficult. Sorry, East Lansing and the whole rest of the state.
Oh, I'm sorry, East Lansing Spartans, belly up to the bar. It's not my first time at that rodeo.
But she finishes by saying, this was really wonderful. Some was hard to hear, but I will try to be better. I will do better. Excellent tips. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Really, really appreciate that.
Beautiful. Thank you. So just letting you know what time we meet: Sunday evenings, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time. We're on Zoom and Instagram live. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email, Patricia at patriciaberry.com, and I'll get you added to our mailing list. Also, this is a labor of intense labor. Jess, Letaw, and I are doing this as on our own time because we feel really strongly about the subject and about move the needle and all the conversations that we can inspire. But if you'd like to help us defray our costs, and if you appreciate our time, labor, and experience, you can Venmo us a donation. I guess it's not really a donation because this is not tax deductible, y'all.
It's not. It's just money to us. But
so I'm going to say contribution,
a donation to the campaign. Yes. Oh, a contribution. Thank you.
I'm going to say if you would like to make a contribution to our work and to the infrastructure as well as the expertise that goes into these conversations, you can Venmo me at Patricia Berry, BERRY -38. Or you can send me a Zelle at Patricia at Patricia-Berry, BERRY.com. And again, not tax deductible, just helps us to defray some infrastructure costs and our expertise.
Not tax deductible, but deeply, deeply appreciated. Part of the reason that we're including this is that we got questions from people about how can I support you? Thank you for thinking of it. I'm not sure that we had that question for ourselves at the outset. So for the folks that are able and want to contribute, we appreciate you. And we really appreciate your time being here with us tonight. Speaking of being with us, we are already ready for the conversation next week. And in honor of Labor Day, we will be tackling how to show up at the barbecue for difficult conversations. So please be ready. This one's going to be fun. I think these conversations are all fun. This one may be slightly more irreverent than what we've brought into the conversation space so far. But we're going to make sure that you are ready to show up to Uncle Chad and his very strong opinions and still enjoy your ribs.
Uncle
It's going to be
Chad.
great.
We got this.
We got this. You got this. We all got this. You guys, thanks for joining us. Patricia has listed her email. You are also welcome to reach out to us at movetheneedle2024 at patricia-berry.com. You can find us on socials. If you are joining us via Zoom, you will get a follow-up email. If you are joining us via Instagram, please DM me, Jess Letaw, that you would like to get the follow-up email, and I'll make sure that you're on that list. Again, we so appreciate your time, your presence, your thoughtfulness in what your contributions to making change the next few months looks like. And let's get ready for a great November 6th. And yes, I know Election Day is November 5th. I'm saying we're going to have the happy parties on November 6th.
Beautiful. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.